pick up again. Well, it seems kind of strange, doesn't it? Keep that in the back of your mind, because it ties in to what's about to happen. This is a very familiar passage. Verses 15. Jesus gets to the temple, so he's on his way in. He's on his way into Jerusalem. He sees the fig tree. He curses the fig tree. He goes into the temple, and what does he see? Money changers, greed, profiteering. He starts flipping tables, driving people out. He is whipping people, whipping animals. This is a picture of Jesus that we're not used to seeing. Powerful, angry, righteous Jesus. And we talk about that a lot. But then, on the way out, actually on the next day, so now it's Tuesday morning, they're back on their way into the temple. And what does Peter notice? Verse 20. Peter says to him, Rabbi, look, that fig tree that you cursed, it's all withered up. And Jesus talks about faith and throwing the mountains into the sea and uprooting trees. So this ties back. Do you see how there's bookends here? It's a beginning and an end with a middle. To understand the beginning and the end, we have to tie the whole picture together. You see, the fig tree itself represented Israel. It always has stood for Israel. The fig trees are very prevalent in Israel. The fig tree itself represented Israel. And the line that says it was not yet the season for ripe figs is saying that it was the season for early figs. Which means before the leaves come, the fruits start to form. And that's edible, but it's not the full ripe fruit. And so what Jesus was going to see as the leaves were just beginning to pop out, he was going to get some of those little baby fruits to chew on, to eat. And there wasn't any of those, which means that there's going to be no real figs when the season comes. Think about, it's a living parable. A tree that doesn't produce fruit. Jesus is saying, Israel, I see you, the fig tree. I see you, Israel. And you look from a distance like you're going to produce fruit. You look like a healthy tree. I can see the buds and the blossoms just starting to come out. And if I were to get close, I would expect to find those baby figs that I could pluck and eat before the ripe figs come on. Not the full figs, the baby figs. But Israel, when I get closer, when I come into your temple courts, what do I see? Do I see people worshiping God? Do I see the fruit of the Holy Spirit being shown? I come to the tree and I find the tree is barren. A barren tree does not deserve to survive. And in fact, he tells a parable along those same lines in just a few chapters about how a barren tree, a fig tree specifically, is chopped down, or is being prepared for being chopped down. And so this whole episode here is establishing, once again, well, actually a new step. David, he's the son of David, the heir to the throne, the Messiah, but here he is also the judge. He has the authority to judge Israel and even creation. All of creation. He can judge the fig tree and he can judge the actual fig tree, the Israelites. He can judge all people and all creation. He has the authority to do this. Do you see the heading of the next section? The authority is questioned. He claims to have the authority. He presents the authority with a miraculous sign, the withering of the fig tree. And what is the first thing to do? That authority is challenged by people who don't want him to have that authority because they know he will exercise it against them. And this begins a whole section of challenges. There's actually 5 challenges that take place over the course of the next chapter and a half. His authority is questioned. The Pharisees, I think it's the Pharisees and the Herodians, come to him. It says, walking into the chief priests, scribes, and the elders, come to him, and they say, by what authority are you doing this? And he asked them that question, by what authority did John do it? They said, well, if we say this, we'll say that. If we say this, they say, we don't know. He said, then I'm not going to tell you either. Right? His authority is questioned, and he defends himself against the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law. But what is implied in that passage? He says, where did John's authority come from? They say, well, if we say John's authority came from God, then he'll say, why did you stand against John? But on the other hand, if we say John's authority did not come from God, it came from man, then the people themselves, who know John's authority came from God, will rise up against us. So they're kind of in a conundrum. They know that the people believe and understand that John's authority came from God. And Jesus implies that his authority is also coming from God. The authority is questioned, and Jesus says, my authority comes from God. And then he goes on to tell this parable of the tenants, where the chief priests and the teachers of the law represent the people who are renting the vineyard. And God sends representatives to come and collect the payment. And they say, we're not going to pay. And they beat up the servant and send him back. And sends another servant. They beat up the other servant, sends him back. Send another servant, beat up the servant. And so at last he sends his son. All right? The son comes. And what do the tenants do to the son? Kill him. Because they say, hey, look, if this guy doesn't have an heir, then we'll inherit the land that we've been renting. Jesus is establishing his authority that comes from God is because he is the Son of God. He is the son of the vineyard owner. And so he establishes the origin of his authority as the Son, the divine Son of God. But his authority isn't limited to just spiritual things. His authority goes over all things. And the next question is about taxes to Caesar. And he says, render to Caesar. What is Caesar's? Render to God. What is God? Jesus' authority is over political kingdoms. Kingdoms, countries, powers of this world as well. It's not just limited to spiritual things. Then the Sadducees come, and they say, what about the resurrection? What's going to happen with marriage and the resurrection? This, in regards to the kingdom and Christ's authority in the kingdom, is a question of term limits. They're not asking, but Mark is telling us that Christ has no term limits. He will reign for how many terms? Infinite number of terms. And how long are his terms? Forever. He's going to reign forever and ever. Christ he has authority over the resurrection even. He can say with certainty how things will be in the resurrection. Why? It's his kingdom. He's the boss. He said there will be no marriage in the resurrection. There will be nothing like this. You'll be more like angels in this respect. How does he know that? Is he in the kingdom now? He knows it because he is the king and he is the one that makes the decrees that stand, that have all authority. The king of the kingdom has eternal authority that has no end, has no boundaries, no limits. And then the final challenge to his authority comes in a slightly more gentle fashion, where the teacher comes and he says, tell us, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus, in his response, shows that he has the mind of God in him. The greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God, and the second is like this, to love your neighbor like yourself. And you notice how the leader responds? He says, you've spoken wisely, teacher. And Jesus says, you are close to the kingdom. Jesus' authority also, Jesus has the authority to admit and to prohibit people from entering his kingdom. Jesus has all authority, limitless power, boundaryless power. He has no time limits, no term limits. He understands eternity. His authority is challenged, and by his responses, he establishes that he is indeed Lord of all creation. It's limitless. But also notice, who is it that's challenging him? What we have is all sorts of different people challenging him. We've got Herodians, people who support Rome and Herod. We've got Sadducees, people who don't believe in the resurrection. Today we would say that's liberal Christians. We've got Pharisees who believe very much in the law. We would say that's fundamentalist Christians. Super legalists, you would say. We've got elders. We've got teachers of the law.